Hi, welcome to this video about the ritual fabrication of mathematical knowledge. I started to make this presentation as a preparation for a conference, but as it turned out that I would not be able to go, I decided to make this video instead. I then also decided to take the opportunity to make the presentation somewhat longer than the conference setting would have allowed, to be able to explain, to the best of my ability, how I think that these things work. My name is Sverker Lundin, and with me I have Ditte Stork Christensen.
Hello.
And she will help me with this. The presentation has 3 parts, and I start with some questions and thesis about mathematical knowledge. I then present a theoretical framework, and in the third part I use this theoretical framework to argue for the reasonableness of these theses. So, let's see if this works. Yes, now it works. So, this first part is about my general approach to mathematics education. So it's about what questions I find important and fascinating, and the point here is sort of to present what it is that I think is the problem, like what it is that I want to explain. Is that okay?
Yes.
With you, Ditte?
It's okay.
Okay, and as I said, I will let this take the time it takes, because we sit here and we have all the time in our world. It is summer, and it's a bit cloudy outside.
My time is all yours.
Thank you, Ditte. I appreciate that. I will cook for you later. So, the first question is, how does mathematical knowledge exist? What is mathematical knowledge? How does it exist? What is its ontology, you could say? So, firstly, obviously, it doesn't have a material existence. It is invisible. It is a kind of knowledge. There is sort of a topology of knowledge kinds, you could say, like historical knowledge, medical knowledge, mathematical knowledge, and mathematical knowledge is one of these kinds. Then I think you could say that knowledge in general, and mathematical knowledge perhaps in particular, can exist as sort of attached to 2 different entities in the world. One of these being individuals, like human persons, who can have knowledge, but then knowledge can also exist in texts, I think. So you could talk about an article or a publication or a dissertation as sort of containing knowledge, and then it doesn't belong to any particular person. And then finally, like the fourth point here in this first frame, is that knowledge seems to be quantifiable, because in practice we quantify knowledge. So you can have a lot of knowledge about mathematics, but not so much knowledge about history. And a publication can be very important, containing a lot of, let's say, new knowledge, while some other publication can have some small amount of knowledge. So the second question about knowledge is, how does it come into existence? So I think this happens a bit differently for individual-borne knowledge, the knowledge of persons, and text-borne knowledge, and they are sort of complement each other in a way here. So for individual-borne knowledge, this comes into existence through learning. So knowledge and learning is a couple that kind of fit together. What you get from learning is knowledge, nothing else. And the only way to kind of get knowledge is through learning. You can't buy knowledge, for instance. And this learning in modern society, that is supposed to take place in education, in schools. So learning and education and knowledge sort of fit together. But, and I think this is important for how knowledge works, is that if you are in school and you participate in education, you may not learn. Like, this is not automatic or obvious. So there needs to be sort of a, let's say, proper performance of education to this learning to happen. So because of this, there is a discussion about the proper procedure of education, the specific conditions under which learning occur. What I'm trying to do here is to kind of map out a part of modern society connected to knowledge. And we have then obviously learning, but we also have education, and education is, you could say, difficult, because it's difficult to make learning happen. For text-borne knowledge, that comes into existence through research. So I think that research is connected to text-borne knowledge in a similar way as learning is connected to individual-borne knowledge. Like it's the only way to produce a kind of new knowledge. So this individual, the knowledge that is attached to persons, that is a sort of a reproduction of knowledge that was once produced through research and then residing in texts. So I think these two modes of existence of knowledge fit together in a way. In a similar way as learning takes place in education, research takes place in the university. And I talk here about knowledge as something that is kind of culturally recognized. You can think here of Pierre Bourdieu as a form of symbolic capital, but not exactly in the same way. So if you kind of learn something or think that you produce some new knowledge outside the university, that is not usually kind of recognized as such. And it's the same if you're an individual and you read books and you think yourself that you have knowledge. But for this knowledge to become recognized culturally, you need to go to a school or participate in education anyway for this knowledge to be recognized as knowledge. So you cannot, for instance, work as a doctor just because you think that you know how that is done. You cannot become a university researcher just because you think you are competent to do that.
You have to pass.
You have to pass tests. Yeah, so that is what I will come to. And like there is a similarity here when it comes to this kind of invisibility of the learning process, that there is discussion about the specificity of research, like the scientific method, because there are people that kind of claim to do science while they are in fact when it comes to the culturally recognized, they are not kind of recognized as doing that. And this is somewhat similar to pupils being in school, well, but not actually learning, because then knowledge does not grow, does not emerge. So, third question, how do we know about this knowledge if it's invisible and does not have a material existence? How do we know if a person has knowledge? Well, I said a few words about that already in the last frame. Like, of course, we do assessments, we test. Yes, that was the telephone. So now we continue. So we measure the presence of knowledge in people and in texts. And we do this in kind of formalized settings. Like it's kind of an important thing for us that these things get kind of properly done. So we make no mistakes as to who actually has knowledge and how much knowledge a person has, or if a text actually contains new knowledge. So this is a kind of formalized part of modern culture, these knowledge measurements. And there are different settings for measurements of people and measurement of texts. So we discuss this, how to measure knowledge accurately. And I think this is important, that once the presence of knowledge has been established, this thing or person's status as knowledge bearer remains. This is why I think it makes sense to talk about knowledge as a sort of a substance that is contained invisibly or immaterially in something. Like when you go to school and you get a grade, for instance, you are not kind of tested again every year to make sure that you actually know the same things, but it stays. You agree?
I agree. Though you
Good.
might say that you can forget.
You can forget, but
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't
structurally.
Like in practice, it doesn't matter.
No.
We can say that, well, people just forget. They go to school and then they forget everything the day after the test. We say that, but we do not adjust how these procedures work. Because if we took that seriously, we would have new tests every week or every year or every decade or whatever.
It really is like it doesn't matter.
We don't really care about that. So, these knowledge assessments always result in a sign that indicate who or what has the knowledge. So this will become important later for my argument about these things. So, the fourth and last question, what are the powers of knowledge? So, this is of course why knowledge is important in modern culture, because it has power, and it does have power. So there are two kinds of knowledge, text-borne knowledge, individual-borne knowledge, or like two modes of existence of knowledge. And I will say that there are two types of use of knowledge. You can use it as signified, you can use the sign of knowledge, and you can use knowledge like the actual substance, call it that. So, grades and exams are signs of knowledge, and they can be used in the education system to be admitted to medical school or whatever. Here you get a publication list that kind of indicates that you have contributed to the production of new knowledge, and that can be used in the academic world. But then, of course, there is this use of knowledge as like in itself. So knowledge as substance kind of enhances the capability of individuals to understand and master the world, and for kind of this text-borne knowledge that research results in, it kind of enhances the capability of society to do new things like build trains and take care of the environment and things like that.
Yeah. But it's only on the first level that it is obviously useful.
Yeah, that is what I will come to, Ditte, but now you go ahead of things here. So, sign use is conventionally established, like it's kind of clear that it's because of convention that this functions, and it functions within certain like systems. If you have read Bruno Latour, you could say that this functions within a network, within the network of the education system, for instance. So I think that you could say that the existence of knowledge and the properties of knowledge, like as connected to learning, education, research, peer review, knowledge assessment, etc., is connected to displacement and amplification. So if you compare the procedure connected to knowledge, like you learn, you get it, and then you use it. You compare that with just doing something and kind of becoming better in doing it without kind of involving this knowledge thing. You can see that knowledge introduces a displacement, a separation, and a delay between the activity of knowledge production, learning and research, and the activity of knowledge use. So knowledge production takes place at the separate place according to a special procedure. So the very thing, knowledge, makes sense of this separate place and this special procedure. And if you do not think in terms of knowledge, if you do not involve this substance knowledge, you would not have this place, or it would not make sense to have this separate place. And we moderns, in modern culture, it is considered that this procedure with this separate place and this special procedure is kind of better or more efficient than just going right to the thing that you actually want to do. So let's say you have a social problem. You can go about just trying to solve it, but it is considered better to first do research to understand the problem better and to produce knowledge, and then to use that knowledge to solve the problem. So what we actually do is put resources into this other activity that is not kind of directly related to the problem that we want to solve, but indirectly related to it through knowledge. So this is something that the very existence of knowledge does. So there is a kind of general logic here that is important for what I wanted to say here. So you could say that there is this entity or substance, which is knowledge, the properties of which I've tried to bring out here. And these properties, or this entity or substance, seems to necessitate certain activities in modern culture. So this, you could see, is how moderns, how people living in a certain culture understands what they do. The nature of mathematical knowledge makes the cultural arrangement of mathematics education seem like an inevitable necessity. So this cultural arrangement, for example, could be kind of how you can use grades and exams or publication lists to get admitted to certain cultural positions. But it is because of the kind of the properties of knowledge that it kind of has in itself beyond culture that it seems reasonable to have this cultural arrangement. So now if you shift the perspective, and that is what I want to do, you kind of turn this around and you start with the activity, the cultural activity, and you try to understand how this brings an entity or substance into existence as part of this culture, so that this culture kind of sees it as transcending culture. And then you can understand from this anthropological perspective how this entity or substance kind of makes sense of the activity for those participating in this particular culture. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. You agree with me all the time. You're so
I
kind.
have to agree.
You have to. What other options are there?
Think.
I know that you think kind of similarly as this.
Yeah.
So this is a sort of constructivist argument, and that we should be clear about that this is like not something that is like new and surprising, but still, like, this is how this constructivist argument works. Like you start with the activity, and then you can explain the thing that is kind of supposedly taken for granted by natives. And now it is not clear, like, if people are so very native, and that will become clear later in this presentation. But this is kind of the general structure of the argument that I want to make in relation to mathematical knowledge and knowledge in general, and to some extent even for like mathematics as something that is talked about in the education system.
Kind of a default position or perspective.
Like
how the natives see it.
Yeah, it's kind of a default perspective. Yeah, that I want to kind of problematize, even if it turns out that not so many people are really like only natives, because moderns are sort of reflective. So everybody have a little anthropologist in them. So it's not fair to say that everybody is just stupid and believe in this obvious existence of stuff. So coming now to the thesis, like these were questions. Like after this shift, we can transform the questions to thesis that I want to argue for later in this presentation. So if we take ontology, for instance, the thesis is that the properties of our modern knowledge is kind of intertwined with modernity, with secular modernity, and it kind of that it has emerged. I will not talk so much about history here, but maybe I will do that in another presentation. But it turns out, I think this knowledge, many of the properties of knowledge, kind of originated after 1830 or so. So there are different ways of talking about this social construction thing. So knowledge sorts, like different kinds of knowledge, seem to have emerged with the institutionalization of academic disciplines and school subjects. You can actually listen to this happening in discussions between proponents for different school subjects in the early 20th century in Sweden. This double nature of knowledge as existing in texts and in people, I think that's connected to a split between schooling and research. Institutionalized, like compulsory public schooling, and state-funded research, and they both were established in the course of the 19th century. And that knowledge is supposedly quantifiable, that is connected to what Theodore Porter calls the rise of statistical thinking, and that happened generally in the 19th century, but for education mostly in the 20th century. So these properties that we cannot take for granted as something that knowledge has, it's sort of obvious, I think, that it has a history, and it's sort of contingent, as you would say, like it's historically and culturally contingent, that knowledge has these properties. So if you look at like this emergence of knowledge, you could say that growth of knowledge is a way to make sense of the activities of pupils and researchers, respectively. That their activity, the visible results of which are mostly marked on papers, result also in the growth of this powerful but invisible substance, make it seem meaningful and important what they do. So this is maybe a bit unfair, because it does not only result in marks on paper, like researchers build laboratories and they build stuff. Again, Bruno Latour talks about this. But in the humanities or social sciences, this kind of applies more. Like what they do is mostly write texts, and it is only this idea of the growth of knowledge that can make these texts seem important and make them seem have effects on culture. And the supposed precariousness of learning gives meaning to the activity of demarcating and defining the kind of the proper procedure. And here, which will become important later, like you can compare this with rituals. Like if you expect some certain effects of a procedure, of a ritual, and this effect does not come, you can always say that it was not properly performed. And this is a way to kind of interpret education, that when pupils do not kind of become happy and find knowledge useful, you could say that, well, it was because we have this traditional, boring, mechanical education that we inherited from our forefathers, and we don't do it properly, so we need to reform it. We need to change teachers' education and things like that. And thirdly, this knowledge measurement, of course, here the idea is that rather than representing a knowledge that was there beforehand, these procedures of knowledge assessment and peer review of parts of processes of fabrication, you could say, like that they bring that which they indicate into existence. And as to the power of knowledge, while it is supposed that sign use of knowledge is secondary and substance use primary, it is rather the other way around. So the interpretation of successful thinking and action as caused by the invisible but powerful substance of knowledge, like that is how we think about knowledge. If someone can be a very successful scientist or successful engineer or manage their everyday life, we say that, well, they have the necessary knowledge. And knowledge is something that you get in school. So this is a way of interpreting activities in culture, you could say. But this interpretation is kind of sustained or
supported.
Yeah, it's sort of supported by how we make conventionally grades useful. So this is something that I will come back to. So just last kind of attempt to clarify this approach to mathematics education that I have. So I think it can be clarified by a comparison between knowledge and money, or maybe grades and money. I don't know exactly how we should do this, but they kind of refer, like coins refer to a sort of a substance in a similar way as grades refer to a substance. So money have value, and Karl Marx has talked about this. So my analysis here can be kind of compared to what Marxists say about the capitalist logic and commodity fetishism. So both this value is kind of immaterial and has properties concerning existence, growth, and use. How do I mean? Well, for instance, processes of growth. Knowledge that belongs to a person grows through learning. Knowledge as a property of modern culture grows through research. How does the money connected to an individual grow? Well, it grows through work. So what happens when you go to work is that there is this substance that is attached to you that grows. And this works in a way similarly as learning in education, with some very important differences. For instance, that if you go to work and you have work, then money grows independently of what you do there. But if you go to school, even if you sit in the classroom all day, it might turn out afterwards that you did not learn anything. So this is not as kind of precarious, this process. It's kind of obvious, unproblematic. And in a similar way as we talk of the growth of knowledge through research, we talk about kind of the growth of the economy, which is sort of the total amount of money. And this is the kind of growth of the substance as such. So we have these two different substances that can grow through different kinds of activities. And I think it's important here to note the strictness by which the activities of learning and work are delimited. You can be as productive as you like building stuff and so on. If it is not work, there will be no money. For the substance to emerge, the activity needs to be culturally certified. You need to participate in what is called work, what is defined as work. And then this definition is connected to the emergence of the substance. And it's kind of similar for the individual here too, in that the growth in knowledge is sort of a reproduction of knowledge of money that already exists. And here, when the individual learn, it is kind of knowledge that has once been produced through research that is kind of recycled and that enters into the individual. Like, it's a similarity, it's not exactly the same. And then again, contributing to the growth of knowledge or money on the collective level is considered to be a great virtue. So this is connected to kind of high status in society to contribute to the growth of this valuable substance. I know that you didn't really see the point of this comparison, but do you think it's a bit more clear now?
Yeah, I've come to the point that it's
You don't
clearing
care.
up.
You don't
No,
care. You don't care anymore.
Clearing up.
It's clearing up. Well, it sounds hopeful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is hopeful.
Okay, thank you for listening this far. Now I will move on to the theoretical framework.